It's my pleasure to introduce our afternoon presenter. I really probably don't have to introduce him, but Adam Hamilton is the senior pastor at the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection in Leawood, Kansas. And I understand you don't root for the Tigers. Is that correct? Okay. But we still love him, right? Let's just hope it's not a Tigers-Kansas City battle later in the year. Leadership is not something that is taken lightly by Adam. He is an amazing leader, not only to the people of the United Methodist Church, but he has been a leader to everyone. Everyone who's picked up his books, has done his studies, knows the prophetic wisdom that he has to offer us. It is God working through him. And we are honored today to have him here with us to help us to grow. I want to also tell you that when he's finished, he will be signing books out here by the Cokesbury hallway. So if you've brought your book from home and you'd like him to sign it, or if you'd like to purchase one at Cokesbury, you may do that, and he would be glad to sign them for you. So know that about 5 o'clock, or when he finishes, he will be signing those books for you out here out of the south door. And I do believe there's something else that's important in your life today, Adam. Adam and his wife, LaVon, have been married 33 years today. Yeah, that's great. So congratulations, and this is the people gathered for you, the United Methodist Church in West Michigan.
Well, thank you. I'm so delighted to have a chance to be with you today. In my assistant's office, which I have to walk through to get into my office, there is a bobblehead Trojan. No, not a Trojan, a Spartan. I'm sorry, a Spartan. Yeah, and I know some of you are not Michigan State fans, but I assume that at least a fair number of you are. Every year, I have the hardest time buying gifts for her on Administrative Assistance Day or birthday or Christmas. I just have really struggled. And last year, I came up with what I thought was a pretty good idea, and I gave her this box, and inside was a Tom Izzo signed basketball, and I heard her shriek like I have never heard her shriek before. It's really great to be with you. She was so excited I was coming up here and hoping I might be converted by all the folks in Michigan. And I'm just thrilled to have a chance to spend some time with you. Yes?
Michigan State.
All right, okay. I will wear this with pride. Thank you so much. She'll be quite happy about that. Well, it is great to be with you, and I want to mention, as we begin, part of what I learned from her is that folks in Michigan can be pretty passionate people about the things they love. And whether they're Michigan State fans or Michigan fans, they are passionate people. And what I know about you is that you're here because you love Jesus and you love the church. And when we love Jesus and we love the church, then our passion is meant to be evident to other people. And we're going to be speaking today about the things that it's going to take to see our denomination and the churches that we know and love be vital and alive in the future. And I'm excited to have a chance to share this with you. Part of what you know, and you've been watching the news recently, the Pew report came out again just a couple of weeks ago. Comes out every year. It says basically the same thing, but the results get a little worse every year. And that is that by the way, I talk kind of fast. You'll get used to it in a few minutes. But, the Pew Center report said once more in their study of American religion that millennials are dropping out of church at a faster rate than ever before. The decline among millennials going to church, the number of millennials who said they are not affiliated with any particular religion rose from 16% to 23% in the latest poll. Right? And many of you know this. How many of you have young people who are under 35 your kids or grandkids who don't go to church? Okay. So we feel it, right? I mean, you feel the burden in that. And part of what we recognize is that in most of our churches, there's not a large number of people who are under age 35. And it's not just our churches, it's churches as a whole across the country. Now, what's interesting is that in this number of people who were under 35, not affiliated with any religion, 44% of them said that religion was very or somewhat important in their lives. So on the one hand, they are, well, this is what we sometimes say, spiritual but not religious. That is, they have a faith, they love God, they're interested in following Jesus. They just are not a part of a congregation or a church. And so this is a wonderful opportunity for us, but it also points to a real challenge for us. Now, I was listening to NPR the other day, and they were speaking about this study. It was actually our local NPR station, KCUR. They were speaking about why so many people were religiously unaffiliated. And it's not just millennials. It's also a whole lot of other folks who are in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, less so among those who are over 50. And you may remember that the study said that the group that had lost the most number of young people and had lost the most number of members in the last year were the mainline churches, of which we're a part. So I was listening, and they were inviting people to call in and express why, if they were among that group who was not affiliated with a religion, why that was. And it was interesting. I didn't hear a single person call in and say, I don't believe in God. I've become an atheist in the last few years, and that's who I am. Instead, what I heard people say is, I believe in God, and my faith is really meaningful to me, but, and then it's what comes after the but, that is what keeps people away. And so for one man, he said, but I was raised in a church that taught me that I had to read the Bible literally, and when it came to science, I had to agree that evolution was the enemy of the Christian faith. And so he said, I got to a point in college where I thought, I can't do this anymore. I believe in science, and I believe in God, and I don't think these two are mutually exclusive. Well, he sounds like a Methodist to me. It's just that no one has told him that yet. Nobody's invited him. I listened to, the next caller was a woman, and she said, I and my partner have been married now for several years, and she said, we are followers of Jesus, but I go to churches, and it's clear I'm not welcome in certain of these churches. And then the next person called in, and he described his experience in church. He said, I go to church, I am interested, I really like Jesus, I want to follow him, but when I go to church, it seems boring and irrelevant. All right? So, you begin looking at all of the buts that come after that, and these are things that somehow are the keys that are pushing, or at least some of the keys that are pushing people away. The problem doesn't seem to be Jesus Christ, but instead his followers, and how we're following him or how we're talking about him. Now, you know that all Christian groups are struggling. It's not just the United Methodists. Over the last 50 years, the evangelical, non-denominational churches, they were growing like gangbusters. The Pentecostals, the Charismatics, the Southern Baptists were growing like crazy. Maybe not up here in Michigan, but in the rest of the country they were. And so, what's interesting today is that those groups are also no longer growing. And in fact, some of those groups are declining faster than we are. So in 2013, which is the last year for which we have the statistics completed in the United Methodist Church, we declined by 68,000 people per weekend in worship attendance year over year. Now, Bishop, I don't recall how many people attend worship in this annual conference? 44,000. Okay. So I want you to catch this, that in 1 year, we lost more people in worship attendance than attend worship in all of your churches in the West Michigan Annual Conference. So it'd be like closing every one of your churches in 1 year and half the churches in the East Michigan Annual Conference in 1 year. How many years can you keep that up? And the answer is about 40. I'm not kidding. In 40 years, if we keep declining at that rate, there will be no more United Methodist churches. Now, that won't actually happen because there are pockets of vitality in places, and those churches will still be around. But we can anticipate that the trajectory is not going to slow down. 2 years ago, we declined by 55,000 a weekend of worship. Last year, it was 68,000 a weekend of worship. Now, that'll go up and down, but the thing is, the reason why this is happening is we have a predominantly older denomination. Now, when you have an average age of close to 60, what you know is that those folks are not going to repopulate the church by having babies. Unless they're Abraham and Sarah. Now, this could happen miraculously, but I pray it doesn't happen in my life. I'm done having kids. So the thing is that if we're not having any more babies and our average age is 60, then the only way that we're going to see our churches become vital and alive in the future is if we figure out how to connect with the generations that we've lost, which are not just millennials, but even my generation. The younger baby boomers were pretty much lost in many of our churches. Now, again, it's not just United Methodists who are declining. Do you know that while last year we had a decline in 68,000 in worship attendance, the Southern Baptists declined by over 130,000 in worship attendance? But we don't celebrate that. I just want you to know that we're not the only ones, and it used to be the Southern Baptists. Now, if we'd increased by 130,000 while they lost 130,000, no, I'm not going to play that game. Anyway, a lot of good Southern Baptist friends, but here's the thing to notice, that was their 5th straight year of decline. Most people don't realize that. And so they're asking the same questions we're asking. My gosh, what's happened? What are we going to do about it? And this is true for many other faith communities across the United States today. So part of what we find is for us, for some communities of faith, the problem is theology and the way they talk about their theology, which is pushing people away. But that doesn't seem to be the problem for mainliners. I think we have a theology that would connect with 21st century non-religious people. I think many young adults, if they knew our theology and understood our theology, would say, I agree with that, I like that. In fact, that's the picture of Jesus that I would want to follow. The problem is we're not doing a very good job of communicating that theology, or we're not doing a very good job of broadcasting it, sharing it, and inviting other people to join in. And when they do actually come and show up, what they find is a church that doesn't seem vital and alive, even though we have good theology. So you can have good theology and still be spiritually anemic. And that's what it feels like to some people who visit our churches. Now, there's an urgency here in this. We've got to figure this out. And so what I'm going to do over the next 2 days with you is to share with you 3 90-minute talks on the things that, at least as near as I can tell after doing this for 25 years at Church of the Resurrection, these are the essential things we've got to get right. If we get these things right, we can't help but be healthier than we are today. And every one of us needs to improve in these. At Church of the Resurrection, we need to improve in these. In your church, you need to improve in them. So here are the 3 talks. The first one is on leadership. And we're going to try to figure out what makes for an effective leader and how can we practice leadership more effectively. And then the second is vibrant worship and preaching. So when we have communities of faith with vibrant worship and preaching, people are drawn, they invite their friends, something happens. The third we're going to talk about is missional outreach to the community. And if we get these 3 things right, we can't help but improve in some ways. We can't help but see our congregations become more vital and alive. Some of you would easily say, and I would understand it, you might say, well, that's all well and good. You do this at Church of the Resurrection. By the way, in case you don't know anything about our church, we started 25 years ago this month. I was actually assigned June 4th, 1990. June 4th, 1990, I was sent out by Bishop W.T. Handy to start a new United Methodist Church to reach non-religious and nominally religious people in the southern part of the Kansas City area. It was my wife and I. You saw our engagement picture. By the way, we got married when I was 17, she was 18. Truly. It was the week after high school graduation. We went to a little Pentecostal church, and the preacher told us that Jesus was coming back at any moment. Every Sunday, the benediction was, if I don't see you next week, I'll see you in the clouds. We'd been dating for 2 years, and we thought if Jesus is coming back at any moment, we better get on with the program. And so we've been married 33 years now, but it's been quite an adventure. In any case, it would be easy, so we started in 1990, and the church today, on an average weekend, between our 4 campuses and our internet campus, the people who worship with us and contribute, and many of the members of our church who join us online, we'll have on an average Sunday between 10 and 12,000 people in worship. We have an amazing congregation of people, about 21,000 people. We had 300 people join the church just 2 weeks ago. We take in new members about every 6 weeks. It's been a lot of fun to be a part of this. And many of you would rightly say, well, that's great. You're going to tell us all this great wisdom of what works in a church in the suburbs that's growing like gangbusters. What does that have to do with me and the church I'm serving? And so what I want to suggest to you is the things I'm sharing with you are the things we've learned are translatable into almost any setting. So I've shared these ideas in Russia, and it's been fun to have Russians write back and say, it worked. And in Ukraine, and in Honduras, and in Malawi, and in South Africa, and in various parts of the world where we've shared these things, we get notes back from people saying, this actually worked in our community. I want to give you one example of this, and this is, what you're about to see is the story of 2 churches in central Missouri, Drake's Chapel and Calhoun. Now, Drake's Chapel and Calhoun were a 2-point charge. They had a student local pastor, and things didn't go well between the pastor and the congregations, and the pastor was moved mid-year. And the bishop had no one to send mid-year to Drake's Chapel in Calhoun. These are churches that are over 100 years old. They're in communities that are declining, not growing. And so the district superintendent went to Margie Briggs, the district lay leader, and said, Margie, I need you to pastor these 2 churches for 6 months. She said, I've never pastored a church in my life. what do I know about pastoring a church? He said, all you got to do is love the people. If you'll just love the people and hold it together for 6 months, we'll send you, we'll send another pastor. Now, that was something like 7 years ago, and she's still pastoring there. When she arrived at Drake's Chapel, they were down to 7 people a Sunday in worship. And Calhoun was down to 30 people a Sunday in worship. Today, Drake's Chapel usually has more than 40 people a weekend in worship. And I want you to catch this. That is a 550% increase in worship attendance. And then Calhoun, which had 30 a Sunday, is now running 75 a weekend in worship and sometimes bumping up to 100. Something amazing has happened in these two churches. So hearing about this, we sent a film crew down to interview some of the members of Drake's Chapel in Calhoun and interview their pastor, Margie Briggs. And I want you to listen carefully to what Margie said and what the people there said were responsible for their churches becoming more vital and alive and growing. Take a listen.
Probably the lowest point that I can remember at this church when we'd come out here and there would be 7 or 8 members here.
I kind of quit coming here at that time.
You know, this is an old congregation. Our average attendance, probably the people were 80 years old.
As we was leaving and driving up the hill, going back to town, I thought to myself, why have I even bothered to come?
They were dying off one by one, and at some point we wouldn't have enough money to keep the doors open.
There was no hope. There was very little hope here. My district superintendent, Cody Collier, called me and said, Margie, we're really having trouble at Calhoun and Drake, and if you could go and help them through the Christmas season, that would be great. And I said, sure, I'd love to do that.
When Margie came, it was just like a new breath of life to us.
She helped me a lot when my mom died. I mean, she helped me a lot.
My friends started coming here, and they told me what a joy it was.
She's one of the best preachers that we've had out here at Drake, and she preaches from the heart.
She's a good example for us to follow, and we want to be like her, and we want to learn from her.
Margie is just one of those fantastic people that makes us proud to say we're United Methodist. The pastor encouraging us to step out on faith and do things that we wouldn't normally do.
I've been very pleased with the Angel Food Ministry, and we've been a part of bringing this affordable food to people in Calhoun and surrounding areas that they wouldn't have that opportunity. When you can share with someone the hope that Christ brings, it's energizing.
We're coming back to life, and we are alive again.
We'll never fill this church, or I don't think we will. But I would like to see that our congregation, that we'd have 35 or 40 every Sunday morning. And I think that's possible for us. I
love these people, and God is working through all of us to say, hey, this is my church, and I need this church to be here on this corner in Calhoun, and I need the church in Drake's Chapel to continue for another 173 years. I need these churches, and as God works through all of us, the energy that comes when you feel like you're a part of the kingdom of God is just something that can't be held back.
If it can happen at Drake's Chapel in Calhoun, it can happen anywhere. And if you listen carefully, the 3 things you would have heard the lay people say there and the pastor say is it took leadership, effective preaching, and missional outreach to the community. That's what we're going to be talking about. Now, before we jump into leadership characteristics, I do want to say one thing. There's one other piece that becomes critically important, and if you study revivals across the centuries of the Christian faith, you're going to find that no revival happened that I've been able to find where people weren't praying first. And so people on their knees praying and yielding their lives to God, praying for the work of the Holy Spirit, earnestly seeking this, changes them and invites God to be at work in the process. You can't manufacture this or do this by yourself. You need God to do this, and you want to be God's instruments. And so this is part of the reason why, as I go and speak in conferences like yours, this is now my 36th annual conference in 6 years or 7 years, offering these same kind of talks. I was in Detroit a couple of years ago, and what we always ask our members to do is to pray for every single church in the annual conference conference that I'm speaking to, and every pastor by name. And the Sunday before I left, we prepared these little prayer tents, and they have the name of every pastor in your annual conference, the name of the church, and the address. And I asked them to put this where they brush their teeth every morning and to stop every morning, and they commit to 30 straight days. No one takes one of these unless they commit to 30 straight days of praying for your pastor and your church. How many of you have received a note from a Resurrection member or two so far? So the lay people, we didn't have your names and addresses, but the pastors did, and somebody's praying, and usually two people are praying for every one of you. Bishop Kesey, I've been praying for you every day for the last month and will be through the next month. And so I want to encourage you to be people of prayer, seeking God to help your congregation become more vital and alive. So let's talk about qualities of leaders that people will follow. And here's what I know. Most of you already know a lot about leadership. You may not have thought a lot about it, but you know a lot about it because you've experienced bad leadership and good leadership, right? You've had a boss that was horrible, demotivating, and just a terrible person to work with. You probably never had a pastor like that, but you could have. You might have had a district superintendent if you're a pastor like that. None of you ever had a bishop like that, but you know, there are a few bishops that have been like that somewhere out in Methodism in the past. And so, you know, we've tasted a football coach, a Boy Scout leader, something where this person was said to be a leader, but they weren't really a very good leader. So I'm going to ask you to draw upon what you already know from your experience about leadership. And I'd like for you to, and all of you should have this outline for my talk today. I want you to take out that outline, and I'd like for you to write 2 columns. The first column is bad leader, okay? And the second column is good leader. And under bad leader, I'm going to give you 60 seconds to write down 3 attributes, qualities, or practices of a lousy leader, like the worst leaders you've ever known. What made them so bad? I want you to write down at least 3, maybe 4, and please take the time to do it because in a second I'm going to have you turn and share that with somebody else, all right? So you have 60 seconds to write down the attributes or practices of the lousiest leaders you've ever known. Are you ready? Go. Ten seconds. All right, and there are folks handing out copies of the outlines. If you didn't get them, they'll be up to the top too, I'm guessing, before too long. Okay, stop. Now I'd like to invite you, and by the way, ushers, there's quite a few folks even down here who don't have some of the outlines. They were supposed to be in your conference packet, but maybe they were not, so, okay. All right, how many of you don't have a copy of the outline? Okay. All right, so ushers, if you could do anything about that, it'd be great. Good luck. All right. I'd like for you to turn to one other person, and I want you to share with each other what is your list of the attributes or qualities or practices of a lousy leader. You have 2 minutes. Ready? Begin. You've got 1 minute. Make sure you let the other people talk. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so that should give you a starting point at answering the next question. In the good leader column, you've had a good leader. You've had a great coach or a teacher or a pastor or bishop, superintendent, a boss somewhere. And what I'd like for you to do in silence, you've got 60 seconds to write down 3 or 4 attributes of a really great leader. What made them a great leader? Begin. All right, stop. I'd like for you to turn to one other person and share your list of what makes for a great leader. You've got 2 minutes. Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, I have compiled a list of my own, probably many of the same things that are on your list. These are maybe a few that wouldn't be on your list. Here is an attribute of a good leader. They brush their teeth. This may sound kind of silly to you, but I had my dentist once told me the story. She said, when my pastor came to our church, I just finished dental school, and she said, my pastor came to our church, and I would stand at the door and I would greet him, and I noticed every week that it didn't appear that he ever brushed his teeth. And then he came to me for his teeth cleaning, and it was clear that he did not practice good dental care. And she said it was really hard for me to think that he had anything to teach me about life when he didn't know the most basic thing, that you should brush your teeth. Now, it may sound silly to you, but there's a whole lot of little things about hygiene, about how you wear your clothes, and so here's just a little reminder: white athletic tube socks do not go with dress suits. Press your shirts. Make sure they're clean. Make sure you smell good when you're with people. I mean, all of these kinds of things. These are silly little things, but I tell you, they raise roadblocks for people if you don't remember these little things. And the key thing is, lay people want to be proud to introduce their friends to their pastor and not embarrassed to introduce them to their pastor. Otherwise, they won't invite people to church. I know this is not a problem in Michigan, but in Kansas, it is a problem sometimes. All right. Here's the second one: authenticity. That we want our leaders to be authentic. We want them to have integrity. right? We don't want them to say one thing from the pulpit and live a different way when they walk out of the pulpit. And this is this is one of the things I learned. I was visiting one of the largest churches in the country, and I went to visit the executive pastor, and I said, tell me about your senior pastor, and I'll never forget what he said. He said, this is what I can tell you about my senior pastor. The people who know him the best respect him the most. And I've never forgotten that. That you want people to say, she's the real deal. She's the same person when she leaves here as she is when she's in the pulpit. And then you hope that they would say, and she's somebody who's really striving to be a real Christian. None of us are perfect. And this is true, by the way, this isn't just about pastors. This is about Sunday school teachers. It's about the leader of UMW. It's about every youth directors and children's, across the board, any leader in any field, authenticity and integrity is important. One of the things great leaders do is they initiate conversations. They don't wait for other people to talk to them. They initiate conversations. They walk down the hallway and they look people in the eyes. They don't look down at their feet. And they say, hi, how are you doing today? It's good to see you. One of the pastors I have loved the most was a great mentor in my life. He's deceased now, but I was his youth director in seminary, Bob Robertson, down in Dallas, Texas. And he would walk through our church, New World United Methodist Church, and he'd walk through, and if there was somebody, a layperson in a Sunday school class, and he was late for a meeting, and they were getting ready for Sunday, getting their things together for Sunday school, it didn't matter how late he was, he would always step in the classroom and say, thank you so much for being here to be prepared for Sunday. I so appreciate you. He always initiated conversation. Now, this is a secret that many lay people don't know, but many pastors are introverts. They're introverts. You'd think they'd be extroverts, but they're introverts because they're drawn to the interior spiritual life. And that's, when you're drawn to the spiritual life, many people are introverts in this who are drawn into the ministry. And so here's the thing. If you're an introvert, you have a people job. And people, being around lots of people for a long period of time may, drain you, but you've got to do whatever it takes to have the energy to initiate conversations, look people in the eyes. And I have to teach this to some of our associate pastors, where I'll say, I need you to look people in the eyes when you walk down the hall. I need you to speak first to them. And so here's just a couple of hints to help improve your ability to do this. Before you go into the office, drink 3 shots of espresso. Or if you don't like that, drink Mountain Dew and a bag of dark chocolate M&Ms. Whatever it takes to give you a little bit of energy as you're going in, because this is part of what it takes to be an effective leader, is initiating conversations, looking people in the eyes, and having some energy when you are leading worship, when you're meeting people one-on-one. Great leaders constantly encourage other people. And you probably know this, but most of the people around you are discouraged much of the time. And when there is somebody who comes along to encourage them, it changes them. And they're interested in following somebody who, after they have an encounter with them, they feel better and not worse. So this has been several years ago. This is just one illustration, but it's one of the best I can think of. I was going in to get gas at a gas station near our church, and I walked in, and the woman behind the cash register was clearly having a very bad day. And she was barking at the customers as they were coming in, and she was like, there was a line of people waiting to pay for their gas. What do you need? What do you want? Give me your credit card. It was just unpleasant. It made me feel, I was just bracing myself for the encounter. And then I had to change the way I was thinking about this, and I thought, okay, why is she this way? And I began thinking, well, she works a minimum wage job. I wonder if she has a child at home. Maybe she's got a kid who's sick at home and she's a single mom. I just created a scenario that helped me have compassion for her. I thought, her child is home sick and she's working this minimum wage job. And then I thought, she might have a boss who never says anything nice to her. And how many of these people treat her like dirt who come through here? The person behind the register? So by the time I got up to her, I thought, what's something nice I can say to her? And I began looking to see what's a nice thing I could say. And I came up with 2 things. First of all, I noticed her glasses. And as a guy with glasses, I always notice people's glasses. And I looked at her and I said, before she could say anything, I said, I really like your glasses. Where'd you get those from? And it like startled her. She was just stopped in her tracks. And she said, well, I got them at Target. I said, well, I really like them. And then this is the next thing I said. Thank you for being here. Because if you weren't here, I couldn't buy gas and I wouldn't be able to do the things that I do. And I know it may be a thankless job sometimes, but really appreciate you being here today. And she started to tear up and she said, that's the first nice thing somebody has said to me in longer than I can remember. And she smiled after that. And she thanked me for coming in. And I stood by the door and I listened to her wait on the next 3 customers, each one of them. How can I help you today? Thanks for coming in. Have a great day. It just took one person And they say, you don't need to go to seminary to learn this. You got to figure out, though, how do we help people feel, I'm not saying you shouldn't go to seminary, but these are the things they don't often teach us in seminary. Here's another one, and this is something I learned from Benjamin Zander. Any of you know who that is? Some of you have heard his leadership talks. Boston Philharmonic. He does these great talks. He has an excellent book on this topic of leadership. And he talked about the fact that among symphony conductors, there are two types. And by the way, he went to Boston when they were bleeding red, and he turned it around and made it a really thriving symphony again. And he said there are one kind of leader in the symphony, and he called them downward spiral thinkers. If you'll bring up the iPad here. And those downward spiral thinkers do this. There we go. They tend to, when they talk, everything's bad. It's just going to get worse. Life is horrible. Look how, and this is how they think and how they talk. And what happens is they have good reason for that, because symphonies have been in decline. The number of people listening to classical music has been in decline. The number of schools that have cut out their music programs has increased. There's lots of reasons for them to feel pretty hopeless about what the future of classical music looks like, right? And he says, so that's one kind of leader, and people kind of like to hang around with other people who are grousing for a while, right? It feels good to complain. And this is what happens in the United Methodist Church. I lead the group of the 100 largest pastors, not the 100 largest pastors, the pastors of the 100 largest churches in the United States. And when we first started getting together, we would sit around and I would listen, and people, not all of them, but some of them would be lamenting the bishops and lamenting the apportionments and lamenting the seminaries, lamenting the general boards and agencies. And it was just so easy to just pile on and complain about all this stuff. But here's what Zander says. He says, people won't follow people like that for very long. He said there's another kind of leader, and that other kind of leader, he says, radiates possibility. And that person sees the same circumstances as the first guy, but he sees possibilities where the other person only sees problems. And they begin talking about, hey, what if we did this, and what if we did that, and you know what, I bet it could be better if we tried these things. And so they look at the fact that the schools are shutting down their music programs, and they say to their symphony members, would you consider volunteering in the schools at least once a month to teach people about music? And they say, well, people are listening to rock and roll music. They're not listening to, good music. And so how about if we did a pop series where we did the symphony played with a rock and roll star, and we brought the whole community together to help rock and rollers learn something about great music, right? And all of these things they start doing, and as they dream, people are drawn to the people who radiate possibility, and ultimately they're turned away from leaders who are downward spiral thinkers. I just want to ask you a real quick question. In your heart of hearts, which is easier, to be a downward spiral thinker or to radiate possibility? And for most of us, it's easier to be a downward spiral thinker. And so we have to work at radiating possibility. But people are drawn to leaders that are like that. All right, passionate, courageous, humble. There's a whole lot of other things that I could mention. So here's the best piece of advice you're going to get in the entire 2 days I'm with you, and that is all the stuff on the bad leader list, don't do that. And all the stuff on the good leader list, let's do more of that, right? We know this stuff. We just have to remind ourselves to really work at it, because it's so easy to practice the stuff on the bad leader list. For me too. And I know for each of us here. All right. Now, leadership is often better caught than taught. So sometimes it's just watching a leader lead, and then you go, oh, so that's what happened. So I put together a little clip from Church of the Resurrection from several years ago, and I want you to watch what I'm doing here as I'm baptizing this child. And as you watch this, I want you to just try to think about what is the leadership principle illustrated by what I do as I baptize this child, okay? So let's take a look. What name is given this child? Tara Lynn Cook. I baptize you in the name of the Father, and of the Son. There we go. And of the Holy Spirit. Amen. And with this oil I anoint you in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And may God's Holy Spirit fill you today, that you might grow up to be a great woman of faith. Amen. Amen. Now, this little girl is going to need your love and care. She's going to need your encouragement and your prayers. She's going to need you to be her church family. I ask you, will you do these things? Very good. Let's pray together. Lord, bless this food. Bless this food. Can we start over? So Do that in front of 2,500 people. And so here's the leadership lesson, is that leaders don't take themselves too seriously. Right? They can laugh at themselves. They can make fun of themselves. They're not the center of attention. They're not the focus. And we're all going to blow it sometimes, and that's okay. So I think, and here's what I know, is people are drawn to leaders that are self-deprecating, self-effacing, who strive for humility, who strive to be the real deal, and they're repelled by leaders who think they're all that. So don't think you're all that. And be willing to laugh at yourself, and don't take yourself too seriously. All right, so now on your outline, we're at point 2, what leaders do, and we're going to walk through this pretty quickly. Leaders set the tone of the organization. Whether that's a Sunday school class or the UMW or the church council, whatever it is, leaders set the tone of the organization. Now, I know you're big Tigers fans, and we're Kansas City Royals fans in Kansas City, but this week I had a chance to go visit with Dayton Moore, who is the general manager of the Kansas City Royals. And I was interviewing him for a Father's Day sermon a couple weeks from now. When Dayton Moore arrived in Kansas City, back when I was a kid, the Royals were winning the pennant every year, or at least in the race for it. And 1985 climaxed with a World Series victory over the St. Louis Cardinals. And it was but after 1985, the organization went downhill. And for 30 straight years, I think they had a couple of winning seasons in 30 years. The 4 years prior to Dayton Moore arriving as general manager, 3 of those 4 years, the Royals had lost more than 100 games. Like the losingest team in baseball. And so while I was talking to him about Father's Day, I thought I'm going to talk to him about some things for you. And I just wanted to know, what it took to turn the organization around so that they won the World Series last year. And along with the Tigers, have been floating back and forth, now the Twins, for first place in our division. And I wanted you to hear a couple clips from him. So here's the first one, that he said it required as he came to Kansas City to begin the process of turning things around. Take a listen.
I mean, my faith had to be very, very strong that we were going to win here. And again, the leaders shape your culture. I made it very clear to all of our leaders and directors that if you don't think that we can win here in Kansas City, do me a favor, please don't come. I mean, this is perhaps the most difficult challenge in all of sports, certainly in all of baseball at that particular time. So we really have to have an undying belief in what we're trying to accomplish here. We're going to create an organization that we would want our own sons and family to be a part of.
Are there lessons in that for the church? I mean, this is part of what I tell our own staff. If you don't believe in what we're doing, we're going to give you 3 months to find another job somewhere. But I don't want you to stay if you don't believe in this. And as lay leaders, we talk about this. If you don't believe that something great could happen and God could turn things around here, then please, now you can't, it's harder to say this as a pastor, but would you consider doing something else besides being a leader in the church? Because you need your leaders to be people who are passionate, who believe that this organization can turn itself around, can, with God's help, be turned around, that we can actually win. Here's the second thing. Leaders clarify and champion the mission and vision. So first, they come in and they believe, and they have a picture of what could happen, and then they clarify and champion the mission and vision. We'll talk more about these in just a moment. And we'll define what mission and vision means in a moment. Leaders hold the organization accountable to accomplish the mission. The pastors are assigned to a charge, and part of our task is we are held responsible and accountable by our superintendent and by our bishop for what happens in the congregation. Now, we're not completely responsible for that, but the buck sort of stops with us. We can't keep making excuses. Somewhere along the way, we and the lay leadership of the church have to be able to say we own some of the responsibility for what is or isn't happening in our congregation to accomplish the mission that God has given us. Number 4, leaders are responsible for preparing the organization for the future by leading change. Leading change. We'll talk more about each of these in just a minute. Now, I want to give you a couple of pictures of what leaders do as contrasted with what managers do. This comes out of a book by John Cotter, who for years was at the Harvard Business School. He focused on management and leadership. And the book is called Leading Change. And I'd like for you to write these down. And I'm just going to tell you right up front, one of the things that Cotter has said, which about American businesses, he specifically spoke about General Motors back in the 80s. And he said the average American business is overmanaged and underled. I can tell you that when I went to seminary, I was trained to be a nominally effective manager, and I had virtually no leadership classes. And so I want you to, as you think about what managers and leaders do, both are really important. You need great managers and you need great leaders. And when you're in a small church, you got to be both as lay leaders as well as the senior pastor. But here's what managers do. Managers plan and budget. Very important. Leaders establish direction and cast vision. So that's the first one. Managers plan and budget. Leaders establish direction and cast vision. Managers develop policies and procedures. Leaders align people and resources to accomplish a vision. I'll read that again. Managers develop policies and procedures. Leaders align people and resources to accomplish a vision. Managers control and problem solve. Control and problem solve. Leaders motivate and inspire. And this is my favorite. Managers create predictability and order. Managers create predictability and order. Leaders create chaos and change. I'll read them all again. Managers plan and budget. Leaders establish direction and cast vision. Managers develop policies and procedures. Leaders align people and resources to accomplish a vision. Managers control and problem solve. Leaders motivate and inspire. Managers create predictability and order. Leaders create chaos and change. I'm going to ask you this question. Do you think the United Methodist Church, well, let me just say, do we fit the profile of the average American company? Cotter said that we are overmanaged and underled. I want you to think about all the committees you have in your congregation. What do? All of the stuff on the management side, right? Are you electing delegates to General Conference this year, or did you do that last year? Okay. So you know what they're all going to do next year when they go to General Conference? We're going to spend 10 days perfecting the discipline. That's about controlling and problem solving, creating predictability and order, developing policies and procedures, planning and budgeting. And there's going to be about, well, maybe a little more this time around, but maybe a day and a half spent doing the leadership functions of the church. And so in our own congregations, we naturally fall into management, and what our people desperately need are folks who can establish direction and cast vision, people who will align other people and resources to accomplish a vision, people who will motivate and inspire and create, yes, chaos and change. Number 5, leaders evaluate, they celebrate victories, and honestly address shortcomings. Here's what I find is, as Christians, we don't want to be the bad guy. We don't ever want to say anything that could be hurtful or mean or hurt somebody's feelings. So you need more space at your building, and you've got a Sunday school class with 3 people left at the prime Sunday school hour. And you think if you started a new class, you could actually get 25 or 30 people, but you've got those 3 people, and nobody wants to say, 3 people in a 500 square foot room probably isn't a good use of this facility. We don't want to say that because we might hurt their feelings. Somebody does a program, and it's a program that's needed. Maybe it's a program for moms in the community, and it could have been great, but only 4 people show up. Now, somebody needs to be able to say, well, let's go through and figure out what went wrong, why we only got 4 people, because this is really a needed program in our community. Evaluations, annual evaluations. I find many United Methodist churches who do have employees, even if it's just one, just a part-time administrative assistant, never do an annual evaluation on the employees. And so somewhere along the way, you're not helping people when you refuse to say the truth, right? Because then the emperor has no clothes. That person keeps doing the same old things, and everybody knows it's horrible, but then they just talk about the person behind their back. As opposed to being honest enough to say, I just want you to know how much I love you and how grateful I am for you, but I do need you to know that these things are really getting in the way of effective ministry for you. And I want you to be better. How can I help you get better at this? Or this program that we're doing, it doesn't seem to be working. Let's come up with something better. Or for somebody who's in a leadership position and that's not along with their gifts, part of the reason why the pastor is the chair of the nominations committee or the committee on lay leadership is because part of your task is to, if nobody else will, part of your task is to say, I love this person so very much. I think they'd be more effective if they were doing this instead of that. Anyway, we end up succumbing to mediocrity because we're too afraid to say something that we're afraid might hurt somebody's feelings. And I recognize that tendency in myself. I'm guessing some of you feel that too. All right, so along that line, just want to remind you, don't forget the celebrating the victories part. Because my tendency is, I have a notebook sitting next to me in worship, and I write down what needs to be fixed. Like every week there's something that goes wrong and I want to make sure it gets better. If all I do is go to our music guy and say, dude, this was not good this week. How many weeks in a row can I do that before he feels like quitting? Not very many. So somewhere in there, there's also I love the way you sang that song. It was awesome. And this anthem, man, I felt so moved by that. Hey, but there's one thing I'd like for us to work on for next week. Can we talk about that for a little bit? And you see a spoonful of sugar, right? Helps the medicine go down. All right, one thing leaders don't do is they don't give up. Okay, if you're going to be in leadership, you're going to be criticized. That is the nature of being in leadership. There will always be somebody who thinks you could have taught that Sunday school lesson better or differently, or could have led youth group differently, or could have done this or that, and you want to pay attention and listen because they might be right. See, only arrogant leaders don't listen and pay attention when people are offering criticism. But here's the thing, no effective leader is going to accept the criticism and then just give up because they were criticized. And that's what we feel like doing. I feel like giving up every year, sometimes every Sunday at Church of the Resurrection. I get nasty notes and emails from people. I have people who quit the church, at various times, and it's hard. And if you don't want anybody to ever criticize you, don't be a leader. You just be a follower and criticize everybody else. I asked Dayton Moore this, the general manager for the Royals. I said, you took a lot of heat and a lot of criticism in those early years as you were trying to lead the changes that needed to happen. How did you deal with that? And this is what he had to say. Take a listen.
The two things I've learned in this position, in this journey over the last 9 years are simply this, is I got to forgive every single day because somebody's saying something. No matter how well you're doing, there's a group or an individual or a group that are trying to undermine or disrupt the morale, no matter how good it's going. Somebody, as I said, is being very critical of you, so you got to forgive them every single day. You got to forgive and move forward, and you can't quit. And again, I've been doing this ever since I was a little boy. I'm very blessed to be in baseball, and I've thought about quitting every single year.
When you think about that, the coach who nearly won the World Series after taking a team from 3 seasons, losing more than 100 games, thinks about quitting every year. And what I know is that there are many of you, and I want to speak just to the pastors for a second. You lay people probably, I know you experience the same thing, but you need to know that there are times, your pastor gets those notes, the anonymous letters or whatever, and they feel like quitting. And part of our task with our pastors is to not only let them encourage us, but we've also got to figure out how do we encourage this person? How do we care for them so that they can be their best? Because if you've got a pitcher and that pitcher has lost confidence in themselves, they're in deep trouble. And there are many of our pastors who've lost confidence in themselves because all they've heard is the criticism without any of the positive affirmation. Part of your job is to help your leader become the best leader they can be. And to whatever degree I'm an effective leader, it's in part because my lay people made me that. Because they believed in me and they encouraged me. And even when and when I was struggling, they would help me. And I think back several years ago, it was 2008, actually. And in 2000, is that right? 2004. It was 2004. And in 2004, I preached a sermon in preparation for General Conference on the most thorny issue of our time in the denomination, and tried to be fair and balanced, but also tried to share what I felt like God was leading me to say. And when I finished with that sermon, the next week, I had a stack this thick of emails and letters from people mad and upset. And that was okay because, see, I'm a pastor and I want to learn from them. I want to see, did I miss the mark? Did I not understand? What did I spent a lot of time praying over that. Had conversations with people, all these things. Over the next year, we had 800 people leave the church. Now, even at the time, a 16,000 member church, 800 is a lot of people. And they didn't just leave. They sent me notes saying, I don't trust you to teach my children about faith. These are people I led to Jesus. I baptized them. I was there in the hospital with them at midnight, and there was, and this was going on, and I'm not prone to depression, but I remember I got about 6 months into this, and I thought, I can't do this anymore. And my thought was, I pastor the largest church in our denomination. Where are they going to move me to? I'm probably stuck here for the rest of my life, and I rather like that. I love this church and I love these people, and I remember thinking though. About that time I was getting, people would call me up, well, would you consider being a seminary president? Or would you consider doing this or that? And I started paying attention to those notes and letters that were coming offering these things. And one night I remember we live out in the country and we had a couple horses, and LaVon and I were mucking out the barn at 10 o'clock at night. It was winter and it was like 20 degrees out, and we're mucking out the stalls in the barn, and I said to her, I know you thought we would stay here the rest of my career, but I just can't do this for 25 more years. It hurts too much. Would you be okay if we moved somewhere? Our families are all there, our kid, everybody's there in Kansas City. And she said, well, here's the thing. Of course, I'm going to go with you anywhere. If you feel like God is leading you and we need to go somewhere else, I'm going to be with you no matter what. I just need you to tell me that God is the one who's telling us to go. And you're not just running away. I would wake up every morning and I would show up at work, and because I know that leaders smile and they say, how are you and how are things going? They're going great. That's how I'd suit up and show up, and I'd be positive with our people and not grouse and complain and, bleed all over everybody. But I kept putting one foot in front of the other, and I kept praying about this, and God, help me to figure out what where I've missed the mark, what I've done. And here's what I can tell you. About 3 months after that, I felt joy again. I'd never been depressed for 9 months in my life. But 3 months later, I felt joy again. And then I began seeing God do these amazing things in our congregation. And can I tell you, all of the best years in my ministry have been since that time at Church of the Resurrection. And I would have missed out on all those really cool things had I quit and given up in the middle of it. I want you to think about the people in the Bible who took criticism. I want you to think about Moses, think about this. He's parted the Red Sea. He's led the slaves out of Egypt towards the Promised Land, but pretty soon they start complaining, right? They don't like the food. Back in Egypt, we had cucumbers and leeks. Here we have manna and quail. We want to go back. They actually have a secret staff parish committee meeting without inviting Moses. And they vote to ask the superintendent to send him out so they can have another leader, right? Do you remember this in Exodus? And, or maybe it was Leviticus. In any case, they, you know what that feels like? And you remember what Moses does? He goes out in the wilderness, he says, God, kill me now. Literally, that's what he says. Kill me now. I don't want to do this anymore. It's too hard. I can't stand these people. Please, kill me now. I want you to think about John Wesley. I just finished writing a book this last year on John Wesley and his life. How many times he was lampooned on the front page of the newspaper. I'm guessing none of you have had that happen. How many times? There was one time he was taking a nap in a house and the people lit the roof on fire while he was napping. They would hurl rocks at him while he was preaching. Once he was standing on the market cross, on the steps of the market cross, and somebody came from behind with a load of manure and poured it on his head. None of that has happened to any of you here. And you know what? The thing about Wesley is he just kept going. He refused to give up even though he felt like it. And so I want to say to some of you, I know what it feels like to want to give up and to want to quit and how much it hurts sometimes to just keep going. And it may be that God is calling you to go somewhere else. So talk to your superintendent and spend time praying about that and discerning, but be careful about running away. Because it's the people who press through who ultimately end up making the difference. Be careful about wanting to give up and throw in the towel. God isn't finished with you yet. All right. I'm going to skip the Unleashing the Power of the Laity and move that to session 3. So we're going to touch on that in session 3. And I want you to go to the 5 key leadership principles. And this is how we're going to end this session today. So I want you to notice I'm telling you something, and then I'm telling it to you a different way, and now I'm going to tell it to you a slightly different way in the hopes that maybe 3 times some of it will really sink in. So 5 key leadership principles or secrets at Resurrection. The first one is, this is really important, it's all about people. Leadership is all about people. It's about your people skills. You can have all the answers, you can have the best ideas, but if you don't have good people skills, you're not going to be an effective leader. You have got to have a good, what we call emotional intelligence, EQ, right? And so if you struggle, and this is where how you dress and how you carry yourself and encouraging all this, if you don't know how to have those kind of relationships with people, you don't initiate those relationships, you can't take criticism and then respond with grace, you're going to struggle in every appointment you ever have. You're going to struggle in every job you ever have if you're a layperson, in every ministry role in the church, if you can't figure out how to have good people skills, which is why we started with the people skills in this talk. This is going to come up several more times. One of the things that Dayton Moore talked about in what turned the team around for the Royals is he talked about at one point the Royals were, almost every one of the players was all in it for themselves. It's like, it's just about me. And so I want you to listen carefully to what he had to say. And Alex Gordon, who you may or may not know, is one of the great players in baseball today and one of the great Kansas City Royals. Take a listen.
Very simple principles to be a successful team. You've got to be able to put everybody else's needs and wants and desires first, and your own needs and wants, desires second. You know, this team became fearless, and they became fearless in the sense that they quit worrying about their own successes, and they start celebrating the successes of one another, pulling for one another as badly as they wanted to win themselves. And because of that attitude, it transformed the entire complexion of the team. The energy of the team was all focused on us. It was we and us, and it wasn't I and my. And that's how this team reached their ceiling in 2014. Alex Gordon became the player he is today because he began to focus simply on this. What am I going to do just to be a great teammate?
More of we and less of me, right? This is the idea. And people who others want to follow, people who become effective leaders in whatever they're doing, are constantly focused on other people, not on themselves. And the challenge is, by nature, we are narcissists. This is part of our sin nature, our brokenness, is we tend to think the world revolves around us. And what you've got to have is a servant's heart, which is what Jesus was teaching the disciples at the Last Supper when he got down on his knees and he started washing his disciples' feet, right? And he said, greatness is measured by the world, by how many people you got working for you and how much you're in charge and how many people you can boss around. But greatness in the kingdom of God is about servanthood. All right, the second of these principles is healthy organizations have a clear MVP. And an MVP is a mission, a vision, and a plan. Not a most valuable player, a mission, a vision, and a plan. So we've said this one way, I'm sharing it with you another. A mission is why you exist. That's what a mission statement answers, is the question, why are we here? What is our purpose? Now, when I ask people in local congregations at annual conferences like this, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but without raising your hands, just think about this. How many of you have a mission statement in your congregation that you know, and if I stopped and asked you right now to recite it for me, you could recite it word for word? Don't raise your hands, just want you to think about it. Because what I find when I actually start asking people is most people say, yeah, I think we have one. I don't remember what it is. Or some people say, I don't even think we have one. And so being clear about the mission is part of what a leader does, and it's part of what helps a church become healthy, is when they know this is why we exist. At Church of the Resurrection, we call it our purpose statement. It's in 20-inch letters on the narthex wall, and it says this: our purpose is to build a Christian community where non-religious and nominally religious people are becoming deeply committed Christians. That shows up at the top of every agenda for every committee meeting in the church. Staff Parish Committee, at the top of the agenda is our purpose in this meeting is to do everything we can in this meeting to build a Christian community where non-religious and nominally religious people are becoming deeply committed Christians. Every ministry in the church shares the same mission statement. Children's doesn't have one mission, and youth another, and young adults another. We all are doing everything we can do to build a Christian community for children, for youth, for adults, where non-religious and nominally religious people are becoming deeply committed Christians. We budget according to that mission statement, that purpose statement. We tell people before they join. So when we had those 300 people join last month, they joined at what we call Coffee with the Pastors. I'll tell you more about that tomorrow. And I said before they joined, I said, I need you to know this is what drives us. And we put it up on the screen. I said, this statement, read it with me. If that doesn't excite you, I'm going to ask you to please find a different church. Don't join today. Please don't join today. There are 144 other United Methodist churches in Kansas City. There's 1,200 other churches in Kansas City. I want you to find another one, because that's what we're about, is building a Christian community where non-religious and nominally religious people are becoming deeply committed Christians. We ask every one of our staff to memorize it, from the custodians to the children's nursery workers, to the senior pastor. Everybody's got to have this statement memorized. And we anticipate, I talk about it at least once a month, so that after 3 years of being in our church, most people could recite this, and it's clear this is why we're here. I want you to think about the importance of mission statements, and I want to mention one of our Kansas City companies is Hallmark Cards. And if I were to ask you, what's the mission of Hallmark Cards, what do you think it would be? Selling greeting cards, right? Somebody might say, well, when you care enough to send the very best, that's a marketing slogan, not a mission statement. But I want you to catch Hallmark's mission statement, and it's only 3 words long. By the way, a great mission statement will fit on a T-shirt. Ours is almost too long. It'll fit on a T-shirt, and a 5th grader can understand it. So ours is on the edge of that. But Hallmark Card's mission statement is to enrich lives. It's not to sell greeting cards. It's to enrich people's lives. So if they can do that through the Hallmark Hall of Fame television shows, they'll do that. If they can do it through greeting cards, they'll do that. They recognize that the day will come where people might not send printed greeting cards anymore, and they'll send digital greeting cards, and they'll do that. And so, but this is their mission. And you see their mission, every employee at Hallmark should be able to recite the mission. And when people show up to work at Hallmark, whether they're pushing a broom or designing greeting cards, this is meant to motivate them. So I want you to watch one of their TV spots, one of my favorites of their TV spots, and see if you can tell how that TV spot is really tying into their mission. Take a look.
Hey, Charlie.
These are for you.
Hi, Charlie.
Hey, Jake.
I have seen it take forever. I have seen it take for years. I've seen it every time you hide your tears.
It's hard being all alone, I guess.
Oh, I have seen the moment slip away and wondered what to do, but I can't let it go like that. Oh, I'll be there for you.
Hey, Mom, Mrs. Kavanaugh gave me this stuff for you. I think she was crying.
And I can't let it go like that. Oh, I'll be there for you.
I start to cry every time I watch that stinking commercial. But can you see their mission lived out in that spot? And that's so much more motivating to people at Hallmark than we're here to increase shareholder value. Of course, they're a privately held company, or to sell the maximum number of greeting cards or something else. Our mission is about people, and it's about helping people. By the way, if you aren't certain your mission statement and you don't have somebody who's gifted, like I asked the Hallmark people to write a mission statement early on, it was terrible. It sounded like a Hallmark greeting card, but we needed something for which I was willing to die. And I mean that seriously. I wanted to know that the mission of Church of the Resurrection was such that I would pour my life into this because I believed it so much. And so if you struggle to write a mission statement, and by the way, you don't need a committee to do that. It may be, just a handful of people working on it. But if you're not able to find one, then I think you turn to the Book of Discipline and you find the one that's the mission statement for the entire denomination. And that mission statement is that we are aiming at making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. And I believe that's the theme of your annual conference this year, isn't it? Something about making disciples? Somewhere in there. All right. So here's the thing. When you decide that the mission of your local church is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world, and you get to church council and there's those people who always disagree with everything, you say, hey, it's in the Book of Discipline. And it's going to be hard for them to disagree with that. Anyway. Okay, so vision, if mission is why are we here, vision is where are we going? Right? And you have like a big picture vision, like 20 years from now. This is what we hope will have been different because our church was in this community. But you also got like next year. And when you talk about your vision for next year, that might be goals. So sometimes visions are goals when they're short term. But when we talk about vision, we're talking about a preferred picture of the future, something that excites people. And you understand vision. If you had kids or grandkids and you were going to take them to Disney World, you began casting a vision, right? You began talking to your kids about, it's going to be so cool. There's the haunted house and there's Space Mountain and there's all these really awesome things. And you're building that excitement up because you're telling them about a place they've never been before and what it's going to be like when you get there. And that's what casting vision is. You're telling people about a place they haven't got to yet and how exciting it's going to be when you get there. Do you know people give their money to your church they may give the money to your church to pay the bills, but people really start giving sacrificially to vision. How the world will be different in the future if we start doing these things now. And every big capital gift that we've ever received at Church of the Resurrection was always given not for bricks and mortar. The bricks and mortar were a means of accomplishing some great vision. By the way, when it comes to casting vision, I think about some years ago, we were, and we continue to do this, in Africa, we're building clean water wells and medical clinics and schools and all kinds of stuff and having a great time doing this. And we have several campuses, and one of our pastors had just gotten back from Africa, and I'd been casting this vision for our people about let's go build deep water wells so that people aren't getting sick anymore in this community in Malawi. And our people were excited about it. And Pastor Molly had come back and she was telling her story about being down there to see these wells. And there was a kid in the congregation who was, I think at the time he was 9, named Cooper Crockett. And Cooper he might have been 10. He caught the vision for this. And he thought, I want to help build a water well in Malawi. So I want you to listen to, we filmed his testimony. He was a little nervous in front of the camera, so give him some grace here. But a pretty amazing kid. Take a listen.
I was in church, and my dad told me about how Pastor Molly was talking about her mom in Malawi and about all the things happening there, and it made me want to start doing a charity for Malawi. I was trying to think of ideas for fundraisers, and I was in the car, and my mom said, well, how about we collect change? So I came up with some flyers. We went out and started passing out the flyers with bags on them. My two brothers, Carson and Corbin, they helped me a lot, and we went back the next Saturday and we raised like $150. People like it when kids do this kind of thing. It's not like kids can't do it, kids can do it. I want to raise more money, and when I get enough to get a well in Malawi, because that's my goal, I want to go to Malawi and see them get water from it and see their smiles.
Cooper started a Facebook page, Change for Malawi. He continued to raise money over the last few years for this. Now, Cooper had never been to Malawi, didn't even know where it was on a map until his pastor and his campus pastor began talking about it, began casting a vision for it. And then we began to talk about the difference it made, showed pictures of it. And anyway, so he now had a vision in his own mind of what he wanted to do. We drilled different kinds of well, but the kinds we were talking about that year were these deep water wells that cost about $9,000 to build. They're sort of hyper-engineered for certain specific situations. And Cooper's been at this now for several years, and I met with him the other day, and he has now raised $9,000 to build a deep water well in Malawi. And usually on these mission trips, you have to be 16 or older, but we're going to make a special exception for him and his mom to go down to Malawi next year to be able to see the place where his well is going to be going and to have a chance to see some of the wells that have already been drilled. Here's my point. That's one 9 or 10-year-old kid, right? You pastor a church of 40 people or 20 or 60 or 600. Imagine what they can do together when you have the power of vision, right? This is what vision does. It unifies people. And then finally, the plan is, it's one thing to cast a vision, but you got to develop a plan to get there. And this is like when I was coming to West Michigan, I had to go on Google Maps to see where it was. And if I was driving here, I was going to have to come up with step-by-step instructions. And that's what the plan is it lays out specific and measurable goals. And by the way, you know what SMART goals are. Many of you do, but if you don't know what SMART goals are, and this is the acronym that I use for SMART, it's specific, measurable, ambitious, not attainable, that makes it too simple, ambitious, realistic, so that cancels, that works with the ambitious. If you say attainable and realistic, that's just twice you're saying the same thing. Ambitious and realistic and time specific. And so these are SMART goals: specific, measurable, ambitious, realistic, and time sensitive or time specific. So a mission, a vision, and a plan. Churches that change the world have these three things. All right. Number 3, change, innovate, improve, or die. Change, innovate, improve, or die. So here, this is a pretty simple concept to get. The world is constantly changing. The people that we want to reach in future generations see the world differently than we see it. We're not talking about changing the gospel. It's just that sometimes we throw stuff into the gospel and think that that's sacred when it's really not sacred. We call those sacred cows, right? Suddenly we've turned certain things into essentials of the Christian faith. When you go back to Jesus and he says, come and follow me and I'll make you fish for people. Right now, even if you go to the creeds, go to the Apostles' Creed and see how many of the things we debate and fight over in churches today are in the Apostles' Creed, or the Nicene Creed, or the Chalcedonian Creed. You're going to find not very many of those are in the creeds. And so when I think about this, just to illustrate, so you know what this is, right? Right. This is Elvis Aloha from Hawaii, and I actually like this album. Yeah, and so I asked. One of the pastors I talked to held these up in a children's sermon one time and said, "Do any of you kids know what this is?" And one of the kids said, "That's a CD for old people." Now, here's the thing. Do you think today's children would know what a CD is? an increasing number. Next year, the year after that, they're not going to know what a CD is, right? So anyway, we went through albums lasted for a long time. They started out with 78s and then moved on. But then a new technology came along, right? It was called the 8-track tape. This is Elvis Aloha from Hawaii. And I remember pulling out the AM/FM radio of my 68 Chevelle Malibu and putting in an AM/FM 8-track tape deck, and I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. How cool was that? And you could have a shoebox, and you could fit 10 of these in your shoebox, and every one of them had 12 songs on it. You could have 120 songs on the go wherever you were. How cool was that? Now, many of you don't remember these, but the thing was you couldn't rewind. So in order to go back and listen to a song again, you had to reverse track and fast forward. No, you fast forward, and then, I don't remember. You reverse track and fast forward, something like that. Somehow it was a convoluted process to go back and listen to the same song a second time, right? These lasted for, I don't know, maybe 10 years, probably not even that long. And then out came the audio cassette, right? Elvis Aloha from Hawaii. And what's cool about this is you could fit 20 of these in the same shoebox that you had 10 in before. You had 240 songs anywhere you went. How cool was that? And you could both fast forward and rewind. It was awesome, just awesome. And then along came the CD, the compact disc, right? Elvis Aloha from Hawaii. And these were great because you had pure digital sound, and you could skip from song to song. You didn't have to rewind and fast forward. You could skip from song to song to song. You could have a 10-disc CD player in your dash, and you could listen. I mean, it was amazing. And then along came the digital music player, right? And suddenly, you had access to, I can fit, I think, 25,000 songs. I can drive coast to coast 10 times and never listen to the same song twice. And my favorite TV shows and my pictures of my granddaughter and everything else. And, I still have this on here. You ain't nothing but a all right. So the song didn't change, but the medium by which we get it did. Right? And you know that Apple right now is trying to figure out what to do because people aren't buying songs anymore on iTunes. Now it's streaming services. Right? So even Apple, just a few years after they took the lead in this, is struggling to figure out, okay, what are we going to do next? By the way, the company that sold the most music in this way in the past was a company called Musicland, and Sam Goody. They actually merged at one point, and those companies went out of business. They went bankrupt about 6 years ago. So here's what I want to ask you: is your church more like this or like this? And if your church is more like this than like this, it's time for change. At Church of the Resurrection, we make sure that 1/3 of all of the people who are serving on committees and leadership are under the age of 35. And 1/3 are over age 55, and the under 35 are mentoring the older ones, and the older ones are mentoring the younger ones, and the ones in the middle are the bridge trying to hold the whole thing together, right? Change, innovate, improve, or die. Number 4, intentional discipleship. Intentional discipleship. And here, I'm going to just write that in, and we're going to come back tomorrow, and we're going to look at this drawing that you have here, and I want you to understand it. We're going to talk about that in conjunction with preaching tomorrow. Number 5 is discernment by nausea. Discernment by nausea. And discernment by nausea says this, that when you come to a fork in the road, and you're going to come to 1,000 forks in the road in any given church that you serve or you're a part of, and that's where a decision has to be made, right? You got to decide to do this or this. And when you have to decide between this or this, of course you want to focus on your mission, right, on the purpose. That's going to drive you as to which these you are going to do. But there's often another thing that can help you when you're not really clear on the mission. You could make a case for this or that. And that is, the question we ask is, which of these makes us feel a bit queasy and sick to our stomachs? And whichever one makes us feel a bit queasy and sick to our stomach is probably the path we're supposed to take. Right? Jesus said it this way. He said that the broad is the way and wide is the gate that leads to destruction, and many there be who find it. Narrow is the gate and narrow is the path that leads to life. Few there be that find it. Robert Frost said it this way: 2 roads diverged into yellow wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. At Church of the Resurrection, when we started the church, we were meeting in a funeral home chapel. That's where we got our name, Church of the Resurrection. Seemed like a good name for a church meeting in a mortuary. And we outgrew that. We finally came to a place that seated about 150 people. And at the end of about 7 months, we outgrew the chapel at 150 seats, and I went to our leaders and I said, we have to start a second service. And they said, well, we don't want to do that. We won't know everybody's names anymore. And I said, well, it's interesting. Our mission is not to be a place where everybody knows their names. It's not to be Cheers. Some of you don't know what that is, but our mission is to build a Christian community where non-religious and nominally religious people are becoming deeply committed Christians. And that's telling us that there are non-religious people and there's no room for them. We have to start a second service. Oh, that's right. Okay, let's do that. Then I went to our staff, which included a part-time nursery worker and a part-time music director, and then several volunteers. And I said, we need to start a second service within 2 weeks because we're turning people away right now. And they gave me 10 reasons why we couldn't do that. And I understand that. And, this is about change. And one of the things I know is I used to think I love change. I thrive on change. Change is my middle name. And then I learned something when a couple of my staff came to me one day and wanted to change something. And I gave them 10 reasons why we shouldn't change it. Is I only like the changes I initiate, right? And so we start talking about change and why we have to do it. And eventually, and it made us all feel sick to our stomachs. Like, how are we going to do it? How are we going to have enough ushers for all the services? How can we have communion service? How are we going to... And it makes you feel sick to your stomach. But what I've found is almost every change that we made, doing it was not as hard as we thought it was going to be. It felt harder when we thought about it than it really was when we did it. And making the change to do the hard thing inevitably resulted in the church's catapulting forward. So I'll give you one other example. We had outgrown the funeral home. Eventually we started a second service and a third service, and we moved into the elementary school gym. But before we moved in the gym, we had a decision to make. There were two options. One is there was a little Christian Missionary Alliance church nestled in a neighborhood. The chapel seated 145. The church seated 210. The church was in the middle of a neighborhood, and this congregation was selling the building to move somewhere else. And I said, we have two options. We can go to the church building, seats 210, stained glass windows, pews, a fellowship hall, a pastor's office, or we can rent the school gym down the road on the main thoroughfare with 350 seats. But we're going to have to set it up every morning on Sundays at 6 in the morning and take it down in the afternoon by 1 and not have any space during the rest of the week. What do you think? And what do you think our leader said? Let's go with the church. That'd be awesome. Are you kidding? We went and toured the church and the school gym, and it was unanimous. We have got to go into this church. How cool would it be? We're going to have our own building, stained glass, pews, 210 seats. And then over here, we'd have to get up at 6 in the morning. And so I said, okay, I want to just play with this a little bit more. Which of these two buildings is going to best help us reach the community for Christ? Why is this church moving from the church building nestled in the middle of the neighborhood? And so we started talking about this, and I went home that night, and I laid in bed, and I tossed and turned, feeling sick to my stomach about moving to the gym. And I knew that's where God was calling us to go. And I went back to our church council. I said, I think this is what we're supposed to do. Here are the reasons why. I know it's going to be hard, but we can do this. We can do this. And we moved to the school gym. Here's one thing I want to mention to you. Had we moved into that church building nestled in the neighborhood, Church of the Resurrection today would be a church of about 200 people Sunday in worship, and I wouldn't be standing in front of you. That one decision was one of 1,000 decisions like it that changed everything. And so in your congregation, who's a lot older than the Resurrection probably, how many times has your church faced a fork in the road and your people have chosen the easier path? And that really does make all the difference. And so I want to encourage you in this. I want to encourage you to take the harder and more difficult of the paths. And so this is where I want to end. I learned this from a seminar that I went to, the Franklin Time Management course. I haven't practiced anything else I learned there, but this one thing really stuck with me. And it said, this is for business people, and it said, the successful business person is willing to do the things an unsuccessful business person is not willing to do. How simple is that? Let me say it again, but I'll put it in church terms. The successful church, however you define it, is willing to do the things an unsuccessful church is not willing to do. We were meeting in the school gym, and a family visited our church one Sunday. Actually, the mom visited our church. And then I went to drop a coffee mug by her house Sunday afternoon. When I showed up, I rang the doorbell. I said, hi, really glad you came. I want to give you our coffee mug, a sign of our welcome, and we'd love to have you come back to the church. She said, well, thank you so much, but I just don't think you can be our church family. I said, well, why can't we be your church family? She said, well, come on and I'll show you. And I went into the living room, and there her son was sitting, Matthew. I think he was about 12 years old at the time, maybe 11, and he was sitting in front of the TV watching a Disney movie, and he was bobbing back and forth in his chair. And she said, my son Matthew is severely disabled, and he needs one-on-one care during Sunday school and one-on-one care during worship. And you're such a small church, there's just no way that you could provide that. And we understand, and we wish you well. Do you want your coffee mug back? I said, no, the coffee mug's for you to keep. But I said, hold on for just a second. They had moved to Kansas City from Texas, where they were a part of a big church. And I said, Ann, we'll do whatever it takes to be your church family. If you'll tell me what Matthew needs, I promise you in 2 weeks we'll have a ministry started for him. She said, are you serious? I said, I'm dead serious. She wrote out for me in a note exactly what he would need, one-on-one care. So we needed a volunteer during the Sunday school hour, another one during the worship hour, 4 Sundays a month. That would be 8 volunteers every month. I went back to the school gym the next Sunday. We had about 200 people in worship, and I said, there was a family who visited Sunday, and they have a special needs child. And I told them that you're the kind of people who would do whatever it takes to minister to this family and this boy. Please don't make me out to be a liar. How many of you right now will raise your hand and say, I'll give 1 Sunday school hour or 1 worship hour every month to care for this child and to minister to his family? And I just stood there. And a hand went up, and another hand went up, and before we were finished, there were 20 people who signed up for what we dubbed the Matthews Ministry. Today we have 150 children, youth, and adults in our Matthews Ministry who are led by, we have a team of probably 800 volunteers who are working in this area. We put together a little video clip about Matthew's ministry each year. Here was one from a few years ago. Take a listen.
Matthew was my inspiration to come to this church and be in his ministry.
When Matthew Joyner and his family joined Resurrection, no programs were available to meet his developmental needs. This created an opportunity to minister to those with special needs and to reach out into the community with the love of God. You have the opportunity to be part of this wonderful ministry. Programs include Bible study classes for adults, one-on-one caring during worship times, Sunday school classes for students, and family night out. This event is an evening of fun, crafts, games, movies for all ages, and fellowship around a meal.
Me close to Jesus and as a special needs students, yes, we just need that. This is not a want, it's a need.
We have people drive from all over the greater Kansas City area to be a part of our church because of that one moment when we were in the school gym and 20 people raised their hand because a pastor cast a vision and challenged his people to live up to what they said they were as followers of Jesus Christ. I want to ask you this question. If Ann had visited your church one Sunday, what would you have said to her? Would you have said, we'll do whatever it takes to be your church family? Because the people who are willing to say that, and the church is willing to say it, are the churches that are vital and alive and growing. I want to encourage you to be those kind of Christians. Now, I want to end with a little advertisement. So I'm going to be standing out here signing books here in a second. I'm pretty sure most of the books will be gone by the end of the evening. I could be wrong, but you don't have a whole lot of the books that are out there. I want to mention 3 books in particular. This book matters to me more than any other book that I have written. It's called Making Sense of the Bible. And I wrote this book because I had a member of our church, Wendell Lady, he's 82 years old, and he came to me and he said, he was the Speaker of the House, the Kansas legislature, a really great guy, United Methodist his whole life. And he said, Adam, I accepted your challenge you gave last year to read through the entire Bible. And he said, I got to talk to you. It was my day off, but Wendell calls, and I said, come on, man, we'll have a glass of iced tea. And I could tell there was something wrong. He was upset. And he came over and he said, I love Jesus. But I got to tell you, I read that stuff about God telling people to kill thousands of people. I don't like that picture of God very much at all. Tell me how I can make sense of these things. I had a young woman who called me from USC, University of Southern California, and she said, this is one of the millennials, and she said, Pastor Adam, I'm really confused because I'm studying pre-med, and I really believe in science, and I believe in medicine, and I love Jesus, and I'm going to a women's Bible study in my dorm, and the women have said that you cannot believe in evolution and be a follower of Jesus Christ. I'm really confused because you never told me that. Do I have to give up science in order to be a Christian, or do I have to give up my Christianity in order to be a scientist? And these are the kinds of questions that we as pastors get on a regular basis. And so I wrote this book. It's 32 short conversations really outlining how do we make sense of the Bible. And there's a lot of stuff in here that might, that would really help you, and some of it might challenge you, and you don't have to agree with all of it. But I'm giving away all the proceeds from this book. I'm not telling you about this so that I can make money off of you. But I think it matters, the conversation about understanding where did the Bible come from, what do we mean by inspiration, how did God speak through the biblical authors, and then really it has the chapters on various things, science and faith, homosexuality, a whole host of other things. I received this note just last night. I get notes like this all the time from people who've read the book. And this one says, this was on Facebook. This woman doesn't live in Kansas City. She wrote, "Just wanted to thank you for writing Making Sense of the Bible. I read it with my husband and went to a discussion group at his church. It answered many of my questions and took away my biggest objections to why I didn't feel I could ever become a Christian. After reading the Bible, talking with my husband, asking his pastor more questions, and learning to pray with my 4-year-old, I have become a Christian. I never thought this was a possibility for me. I feel so grateful and wanted to let you know how your book has helped me. Thank you." This book says some things that most of you pastors can't afford to say in your congregation. But I'd invite you, even if you disagree with it, if you disagree with the chapter, you're going to agree with most of it. But this is the kind of stuff we learn in seminary, but we pastors don't know how to share it with our congregations because we're afraid it's going to hurt somebody's faith or disappoint them. I'd like to encourage you, there's a DVD that goes with it. 2 other things. This book just came out just this week. It's called The Call, and it's the life and message of the Apostle Paul. I went to Turkey, Greece, and Italy to film with a film crew the places where Paul visited, and then talk about Paul's call to ministry and what we can learn from Paul's call to ministry and his life and his letters, his message that might help us be authentic followers of Jesus Christ today. And you're the first people to ever have this book. Nobody else has it yet. And then last year I wrote a little book called Revival, and this book is the story of John Wesley's life and faith. I went to England and filmed all the places, or many of the places that were important in Wesley's life. There are pictures in here and the story. And part of the reason why I wrote this is I think a lot of us as Methodists have forgot what that message is that's so good that young people would respond to. And this book is really designed to foster a revival in your church as you remember who we are as United Methodists. So I just want to mention those are several of the books that are out there. Thanks for letting me hang out with you. We're going to come back. I'm going to be with you again at 8 o'clock tonight. I'll be out here just after this session, signing books, not any of the others. And I'd like to say a prayer for you right now if I could. Would you bow with me in prayer? God, how grateful we are for the love that you have for us in Jesus Christ, and for the calling you've placed on our lives to be leaders in your church. Help us, O Lord. Help us not to be discouraged. Strengthen us and encourage us, we pray. Fill us and the Western Michigan Annual Conference with your Holy Spirit once again. Revive us, O Lord. And help us to be your instruments to reach new generations of people. Help them to see you in us and in the congregations that we lead. We love you. We offer our lives to you. In Jesus' name. And everyone said, Amen. Amen. See you in a couple hours.